Kwame was sitting under the large baobab tree, looking out at the village of Nintendo. The warm wind blew softly, and he thought of Nala, his wife who had passed away a few years ago. Though time had gone by, her memory was still vivid in his mind. Nala had always been the love of Kwame's life, and since she left, he felt incomplete. But despite the pain, he had an important mission: to care for his beloved Deborah. Since Nala's passing, Deborah had become the reason Kwame continued on. He remembered the nights when the little girl would wake up frightened, crying out for her mother. He would hold her tightly, trying to soothe her, saying, "Everything will be all right, my dear. Daddy is here." He felt his daughter's pain and knew that Deborah missed her mother every day. It was a silent feeling but ever present. Kwame dedicated all his time and effort to raising her the best way he could. He taught her the values of the village, like respecting elders and being courageous. Deborah grew up strong and loved, but there was something that worried her father more each day. She dreamed of going beyond the village. And every time he saw her looking at the horizon, he knew that one day she would surely leave to follow her dreams. This thought made Kwame's heart tighten, for he didn't want to lose his daughter, the only person who still gave him strength. As time passed, old Kwame increasingly felt the closeness of that moment. Deborah, like her mother Nala, had a free spirit. She longed to see the world beyond the mountains that surrounded the village. But at the same time, Kwame also felt confident because he had taught her all he could. And now all that was left was to trust that his daughter knew how to take care of herself. Deborah had always been a young woman full of dreams, ever since she was little. Life in the village had always been very simple, full of routine and limitations, and everyone said that her destiny lay there, beside her family, taking care of the land and building a common life like everyone else. But Deborah wanted more, much more. Everything changed when James appeared in the village for the first time. He was different from anyone Deborah had ever seen. It wasn't just his appearance that captivated her, tall, with a smile that seemed to light up any room, but also the way he carried himself, confident, like someone who knew the whole world and carried stories in his eyes. James was a merchant from the big city, and every time he appeared in the village, he brought with him the scent of novelty and adventure. He had a certain mystery in his gaze, something that made her feel an almost uncontrollable curiosity. Almost without noticing, Deborah began to get closer to the handsome young man. James was also captivated by Deborah's beauty, and every time he came to the village, he made a point of bringing her gifts and spending hours talking. After a few meetings, they started a romance. James seemed to offer everything Deborah had always wanted: the chance to escape the monotony of the village, explore new places, and live the life she had always dreamed of. They spent hours together, walking, talking about the world, and every word James spoke enchanted her. In their conversations, he talked so easily about the big cities, the opportunities that existed beyond the small village, that Deborah felt as if she were already living it. But at the same time, there was something about James that Deborah couldn't completely understand, a certain mystery. There were moments when he became distant, as if carrying a weight he didn't want to share. Gradually, Deborah began to notice that despite the brightness and charm he brought, there was something dark behind that smile. She ignored these signs, believing that the love she felt for him was enough to overcome any doubts. After all, it was the first time she had felt so alive, so close to realizing her dreams. What could go wrong? Deborah threw herself into the relationship with everything she had, leaving behind the warnings and concerns of her friends and family. But she was blinded by passion and the promise of a different life. She wanted so much to believe that James was the ticket out of that place that she ignored any doubts. From the first moment James set foot in the village, Kwame felt something strange in the air. He was a wise man, with years of life experience, and knew how to recognize when someone wasn't what they seemed. James had that way of speaking that impressed people, always with the right words, the perfect smile, and an impeccable appearance, but Kwame saw beyond that. Like Deborah, he noticed the coldness in his eyes, the arrogance hidden behind each calculated gesture. It wasn't just a father's jealousy. It was something deeper, a premonition Kwame couldn't ignore. But he decided to stay silent. He didn't want to push his daughter away. She was so enchanted with James that nothing or no one could make her see beyond the shine he emanated. Kwame kept his doubts to himself, waiting for time to reveal the truth. Days passed, and to everyone's surprise, James proposed to Deborah. It was a scene that threw the village into a frenzy. Everyone commented on how lucky she was, about to marry such an important man, admired by many, especially the young women in the village, who sighed every time he appeared. James made the proposal in a grand way, in a manner Deborah would have never imagined. Kneeling before her in the middle of the square, with everyone watching, he asked her to marry him with a diamond ring that glittered like nothing the village had ever seen before. To Deborah, it was the most magical moment of her life. She accepted immediately without hesitation, tears of joy streaming down her face. It was as if all her childhood dreams were finally coming true. But while Deborah laughed, jumped, and hugged James, Kwame watched from a distance. Her father couldn't smile, nor celebrate with the others. Something inside him screamed that this wasn't right. Looking at James at that moment, trying to find any sincerity in his eyes, all he found was the same emptiness, the same coldness that had troubled him from the start. Kwame wanted to intervene, wanted to protect his daughter, but how could he? Deborah was so happy, so enchanted, that any word from him might push her away forever. She was determined, and nothing Kwame said would change the course of things. So once again he swallowed his concern, forcing a smile when she came running toward him, showing the shiny ring on her finger and asking what he thought. "Are you happy, my daughter?" Kwame asked, trying to hide the worry in his voice. Deborah, without noticing, responded with a glow in her eyes he had never seen before. "More than ever, father. I'm living a dream." Kwame nodded, but his heart was heavy. He wished from the bottom of his soul that he was wrong about James, that it was all just a mistaken impression. Even so, he remained silent, respecting his daughter's choice, but feeling the weight of the responsibility of always being vigilant, watching from a distance, ready to act if something went wrong. The preparations for the wedding began, with the entire village celebrating, while Kwame, with a heavy heart, simply watched everything. The ceremony was beautiful, a dream for any young woman in the village. After the wedding, Deborah left for the big city with James, leaving behind the quiet and familiar life of the village. Her father watched her go with a tightness in his chest, knowing this was the beginning of a new chapter, but unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Days passed, and at first, Kwame still received a few calls from Deborah. Short and hurried, but at least he could hear her voice, which calmed him a bit. She said she was very busy with her new life, that the big city was bustling and full of commitments. However, as the months went by, these conversations became increasingly rare. When he called, Deborah always seemed distant, as if she were talking out of obligation, and she never gave detailed answers when he asked about James and their marriage. Kwame couldn't hide his concern. He knew his daughter would distance herself a little after the wedding, but he didn't expect it to happen so quickly and in such a cold way. This wasn't the Deborah full of dreams and energy he knew. It seemed like she was hiding something, but he had no idea what it could be. Deborah barely visited him in the village, and when she did, the visits were brief, always accompanied by excuses. "James is very busy. The city is so far away, father. Or we have so many things to take care of." Kwame felt like he was losing his daughter. And worse, he sensed that Deborah was pulling away because she didn't want him to know the truth. This kept him awake many nights, replaying their brief conversations in his mind, trying to decipher what might be happening. One day, while Deborah was visiting him in the village, Kwame noticed that his daughter was avoiding eye contact. Her behavior was restless, always fidgeting with her hands, glancing frequently at her watch, as if she were desperate to leave. That day, Kwame couldn't take it anymore and confronted her, asking her to speak openly about her life with James, but Deborah simply said everything was fine, quickly changing the subject. As she left, Kwame felt a tightness in his chest, as if he knew his daughter was in danger but could do nothing to help her. He even thought about going to the city for a surprise visit, but Deborah always found an excuse to postpone. "Now isn't a good time, father. or James is traveling for work, which only increased his suspicions. Why was she trying to keep him away? What could be so serious that she didn't want him to know? The weight of worry consumed him daily. The distance, which once seemed like a natural decision, had now turned into an abyss between father and daughter. One day, he tried calling to check on her, but couldn't get any news. He tried several times without success, which made Kwame desperate. He realized he could no longer wait or accept excuses. Time seemed to be running against him, as if something terrible could happen at any moment. So the old man decided to make a surprise visit. He couldn't be kept at a distance any longer. He gathered his few belongings, mustered his strength, and set off toward the big city, determined to find out what was really happening with his beloved Deborah. The journey was long and distressing, as he didn't know exactly what he might discover on this visit. When he finally arrived at the house where Deborah lived with James, Kwame was impressed by the size and luxury of the place. It looked like one of those mansions that only existed in stories. But something didn't feel right. The grand facade didn't match the heavy feeling he carried in his chest. He rang the doorbell, waited, and nothing. He decided to knock harder, and after a few minutes, the door finally opened. One of the house's servants answered, and Kwame informed him that he was there to speak with James. The butler let him in, and when Kwame took a step inside the mansion, what he saw left him completely shocked. But before continuing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any updates, okay? Kneeling on the floor was Deborah, his beautiful, sweet daughter, with her hands covered in soap, scrubbing the floor like a servant, as if she lived there to serve, not to be cared for. Kwame's heart raced. He never imagined seeing his daughter in such a situation. Deborah had always been so joyful, so full of life, and now she was submissive with tired, weary eyes, not even noticing that her father had entered the house. Kwame froze for a moment. This was the answer to all his worries, simply a nightmare. He blinked several times as if expecting to wake up, but the scene remained the same. She stayed in the same place, scrubbing the floor of that immense mansion as if life had drained all her strength. "Deborah?" he called, but his voice came out trembling, almost unable to believe what he was seeing. Recognizing her father's voice, she lifted her head, and when she looked at him, Kwame almost didn't recognize her. It wasn't just her appearance that had changed. There was something in her eyes, as if the Deborah he knew had disappeared, leaving only a shadow in her place. "Father!" Her voice came out weak, her eyes brimming with tears, surprised but without the sparkle he was used to hearing. She didn't get up immediately, as if she were stuck there, afraid to stop what she was doing. Kwame rushed to her, trying to understand what was happening. "What are you doing here like this?" he asked, confusion and pain mixing in his voice. But Deborah just lowered her head, unable to answer. He helped her to her feet, holding her by the arms, as if trying to bring back the daughter he loved so much. "Deborah, tell me what's happening. Why are you doing this?" he insisted, but she remained silent, only with tears in her eyes. "It's nothing, Father, I'm just helping the servants," she replied, but Kwame was sure that something was very wrong in that place. Deborah's submissive posture, her silence, the way she seemed afraid to say anything, all of it was a cry for help that Kwame could now finally hear. She was hiding something, and this filled him with both anger and sadness. Kwame looked around, still holding his daughter in a tight embrace. He noticed that the house was spotless, as if every corner had been meticulously cleaned, but the price for it seemed to be Deborah's soul. The man who had promised to take care of her and give her a life of comfort had actually turned her into a slave, and God knows what else he might be capable of. Kwame felt his blood boil, the rage rising quickly. He needed answers, and he wasn't leaving until he understood what was going on. "Where is James?" he asked, furious. Deborah stayed silent as if she were afraid to answer, but with his insistence, she finally revealed that James was in his office, pointing to a room at the end of the hallway. Kwame stood up quickly, without thinking twice. He went straight to James, who was sitting in a luxurious chair, with a look of disdain in his eyes, as if everything was perfectly normal. Kwame approached him, his voice heavy with anger, and confronted him. "What are you doing to my daughter? Why is she in this condition?" James, without even standing up, gave a cold, almost mocking smile. "She does it because she wants to. No one forces her to do anything. Deborah knows what's necessary to keep this house in order. I don't have to ask. She does it of her own free will." His words came out with an arrogance that only fueled Kwame's anger. But something about Deborah's behavior, who was standing just beside him, disturbed him deeply. She was quiet, her head down, unable to look her father in the eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, and even without saying a word, her entire body showed fear. Kwame noticed this immediately. This wasn't free will. It was submission, control. He knew what was happening, even if Deborah tried to hide it. "Don't lie to me, James," Kwame shouted, his fists clenched, trying to control the rage that threatened to explode. "I know my daughter, and she would never accept living like this, never. What have you done to her?" James, unmoved, just shook his head as if dealing with a fool. "You're overreacting. Deborah knows what's best for her and just does what she thinks is right. There's no problem here. Just a wife taking care of her home. You should be proud of your daughter." As James spoke, Kwame kept his eyes fixed on Deborah, who was also in the room, and that's when he saw something that broke his heart even more as a father. With each word James said, she shrank a little more, as if she were being crushed by an invisible weight. Her silence was deafening. It was clear that she wanted to speak, to cry for help, but something was holding her back. That something was her own husband. It wasn't just the fear of a confrontation or an uncomfortable situation. It seemed much deeper, an absolute control that Kwame could see in every submissive gesture of his daughter. "Deborah, talk to me," Kwame insisted, his voice now full of pain. "Why are you like this? Please tell me the truth." But Deborah only bit her lips and shook her head slightly, as if apologizing for something that wasn't even her fault. And that simple gesture confirmed Kwame's worst suspicions. James, noticing the tension in the air, stood up slowly, walking toward his father-in-law with a superior air. "I think you're meddling where you shouldn't. This is our life now, and she's accepted it. You need to stop treating her like a little girl. Deborah is my wife now, and she knows exactly what her role is." Those words made Kwame tremble. He wanted to take his daughter away from there at that very moment. But the situation was more complex than it seemed. James exercised a kind of power over her that Kwame couldn't fully understand yet, but it was clear that his daughter was being controlled, dominated, and more than ever, he needed to find a way to save her. But how? How could he free Deborah from that man's grasp without causing even more harm? Kwame realized he couldn't do anything at the moment, so he decided to leave the mansion. He could barely believe what he had just witnessed. The image of Deborah with her eyes down, her voice trembling, and that fear written on her face wouldn't leave his mind. The next day, Kwame set out in search of help. He remembered Mosi, an old friend. Mosi was well respected, deeply knowledgeable about the laws and traditions, and more importantly, he knew how to resolve family conflicts that spiraled out of control. If anyone could guide him, it would be Mosi. As soon as he arrived at Mosi's modest house, Kwame was greeted with the calm wisdom the old man always exuded. Sitting in a simple room, Mosi listened attentively as his friend poured out his heart about Deborah's situation. The anger and despair were evident in Kwame's voice, but he also knew he needed to act cautiously. "My daughter is being mistreated. I see it in her eyes. She's afraid, and that fear is consuming me." Mosi, ever thoughtful, took a moment before responding. "Kwame," he began in his aged, raspy voice, "you know that in our traditions, marriage is a sacred alliance. It's not easy to interfere without causing more damage." Kwame nodded, knowing that Mosi was right, but the elder continued, "However, if what you say is true and your daughter is being treated as a servant instead of a wife, there are ways to deal with it. Our traditions protect the dignity of a woman, and you, as her father, have the right to ensure that your daughter is treated with the respect she deserves." Mosi's words brought a momentary relief to Kwame. There was hope after all. He knew that, with the elder's guidance, he could find a way to free Deborah from James's grip. That same night, to Kwame's surprise, Deborah called, breaking the silence that had settled between them for so long. In a private conversation, far from James's ears, she finally opened up. The words flowed like a flood of emotions repressed for months, maybe even years. "Father," she began with a trembling voice, "James treats me like a servant. He stops me from going out, from working. He controls everything I do, everything I think. He forces me to do terrible things." Kwame's heart tightened with every word his daughter said. She continued, tears streaming down the face that was once so full of life but was now exhausted and worn out. "I'm no longer myself. I feel trapped, suffocated. And when I try to speak, he just ignores me, as if I don't have a voice." Kwame, trying to remain strong so she wouldn't notice his distress, said, "My daughter, you are not alone. I'm here, and we will find a way to end this. He will never let me go. James is dangerous. He won't let me leave this house so easily." The weight of Deborah's words fell on her father like a stone. The situation was serious, but hearing his own daughter say she was afraid of her husband made him even more determined to act. "I will find a way out. No matter what happens, you won't keep living like this." Suddenly, Deborah heard James's footsteps approaching, forcing her to end the call in fear. Kwame, imagining what might have happened, swore to himself that he wouldn't rest until he saw his daughter free. With Mosi's help, Kwame began to act more cautiously. He knew that Deborah's safety was at stake, and every step he took was carefully thought out to ensure she had a way out. During his quiet conversations with the elder, they devised a simple but effective plan. To ensure that Deborah had a means of supporting herself, independent of James, Kwame decided to start transferring part of his lands and properties to his daughter's name. It was a discreet but powerful action that would give Deborah the financial security she needed to free herself from her husband's grip. He knew James wouldn't suspect anything, and that gave Kwame the advantage he needed. Meanwhile, Deborah, still in secret, was preparing for her escape. With her heart racing and in constant fear of being discovered, she trusted her father completely. Kwame had taught her to be strong since she was a little girl, and now, more than ever, she needed all the strength she had left. Every glance from James put her on edge, as if he could sense what she was about to do, but Deborah remained firm, hiding her anxiety while following the steps Kwame and Mosi had planned. Finally, the day arrived. In the dead of night, with her father's help, Deborah escaped from the house that had been her prison for so long. Kwame was waiting for her outside, and when she got into the car that would take her to safety, the relief was almost immediate. When James discovered Deborah's escape, his anger was immediate. He never imagined she would have the courage to escape his authority, to leave the house without his permission. In his mind, Deborah was always his property, a woman without a voice that he could control. Furious, he tried to intimidate her. He used every means at his disposal, from verbal threats to sending messages through acquaintances in the village. He wanted Deborah to know that he wouldn't leave her alone, that he would always be there to bring her back, by force if necessary. But this time she was no longer alone. She had Kwame by her side and, more importantly, the support of the community. The news of how James had treated her spread through the village, and with Mosi's influence, the elders decided they could no longer tolerate James's abusive behavior. There was a limit to how much a man could control his wife, and James had crossed that limit long ago. The village's laws and traditions were on her side, guaranteeing her freedom and protecting her rights. Mosi's presence was key in helping the elders understand the gravity of the situation. They knew that allowing James to remain in the village would be like condoning his abuse, and that went against everything the community stood for. When James was confronted by the community, he found himself cornered. The threats he had made against Deborah were now known to everyone, and the weight of village justice fell upon him. He tried to argue, using his arrogance to elevate himself above others, but this time his words held no power. His wife, who had once been fearful and submissive, now stood firm, protected by the watchful eyes of those around her. James had lost the control he so cherished, and for him that was the greatest defeat. He was forced to leave the village, expelled by the weight of shame and the force of local laws. He could never return to that place again. His influence and power vanished in the face of the community's unity. Free from James, Deborah felt like she could breathe again. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she felt that her life was her own again. Now she could walk the village streets without fear, without the weight of oppression. But even with her newfound freedom, she didn't just want to rebuild her own life. She wanted to help other women who, like her, had been silenced by their husbands, partners, or society itself. She decided to use her experience to become an active voice in the village. The pain she had endured would be turned into strength to help other women. Often, true love requires wisdom and patience to know when to let someone follow their own path, but also the courage to intervene when necessary. Moreover, this story reminds us that it is never too late to fight for justice and freedom, and that the support of the community and family can be crucial in overcoming adversity. What did you think of this emotional story? Leave your comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates. Thank you for following us this far, and see you in the next video.